morning, Jeff. Good morning. It's a pleasure to see all the participants, the speakers. It's a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you very much to NID and the Continental Free Trade Area. So, with your permission, Jeff, as moderator, I will start delivering my remarks. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the second international webinar of the 2023 Africa Dialogue Series on the theme Growing Middle Class and Continental Import Substitution, Connecting the Dots to Unlock Made in Africa. At the outset, allow me to thank the African Union Permanent Observer Mission to the United Nations, our long-standing partner in co-organizing the annual Africa Dialogue Series. I also wish to thank the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO, and the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat for their excellent cooperation as our partners of choice for this week's activities, including today's webinar. This webinar speaks to the interplay and mutually reinforcing relationship between a growing African middle class, intra-African trade, industrialization, and economic growth. These are the four dots that in the next 10, 15 years, we as Africans, we need to connect. This is a critical issue because the growing demand for added value consumer goods has the potential to drive intra-African trade flows and boost productive capacities. But if it does not boost productive capacities, risks perpetuating or even increasing the current imbalance in international trade that has been undermining African economies. Last week, we discussed about Africa's commodity dependence and pointed out that it keeps African economies at the bottom of the global value chains. Our discussions last week underscore that economic and export diversifications are necessary to break the vicious cycle. A direct result of commodity dependence and the lack of economic diversification is that many added value products that are consumed in the continent are imported. Everybody knows. Consequently, if the demand for added value products increases in line with the growing of the middle class, the immediate effect, unless we adopt targeted policy measures, is that imports of added value products will increase in the same measure. This is a huge risk that would only multiply the continent's dependence. If we want to leverage the growth of the middle class to promote Africa's productive capacities through industrialization, we need to adopt continental import substitution strategies. Allow me to repeat. We need to adopt continental import substitution strategies that protect African industries and prioritize the made in Africa. For these strategies to be maximized, 3 steps are fundamental according to me. First, import substitution cannot lead to inefficient production structures. And the African Continental Free Trade Area is the perfect instrument to mitigate this risk. With a potential market of 1.3 billion people, the Continental Free Trade Area will facilitate the establishment of scale economies and promote competition among African businesses and African industries in the continent, ensuring that we develop high quality added value African products at a competitive prices. Second, we need to promote in a very actively way, in a very massive way, made in Africa. A key success factor of this strategy is to eliminate trade barriers for made in African products. Third, must use the opportunity to create a ripple effect, adopting a people-centered approach that enhances the distributional impact of the Continental Free Trade Area and expands opportunities for the economic participation of women and youth is key to deliver an internally driven sustainable finance and boosting even more the growth of the middle class, which in turn can contribute to further strengthening our productive capacities and industrialization. This is the spiral that we all need to put in place. I'm confident that these steps will help leverage our growing middle class to maximize the impact of the Continental Free Trade on industrialization, job creation, household income, and consequently, development. I look forward to the concrete recommendations that will emerge from our discussion today. Thank you very much, and back to you, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Undersecretary General Cristina Duarte. Appreciate the welcoming remarks. Very well said. Continental import substitution structures. Very good. Now we're going to go to some opening remarks. I'm going to start with Dr. Kai Betke, representing the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO. Doctor, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning to you in New York. Good afternoon to all the other colleagues. It is indeed a great pleasure and honor for me to address you this morning and this afternoon on behalf of the Director General of UNIDO and welcome you to this very important seminar and webinar, actually. And I really like to thank my predecessor, the Undersecretary General, Dr. Duarte, for highlighting a very important point, which I think you will see that UNIDO is bringing to bear what she has been requiring, which is increased added value generated in Africa for the African market. Really, our meeting today is part of the African Dialogue series held under the theme Market and Scale, Unlocking Industrialization through Intra-African Trade. And this dialogue is organized, as we know, by our esteemed partners in the United Nations Office of the Special Advisor on Africa and the African Union Permanent Observer Mission to the United Nations. Allow me also very much to thank the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, with whom we have the honor to be the co-organizers of this webinar here this morning and this afternoon. As we heard, at the heart of this webinar is the challenge and the ambition of inclusive and sustainable industrialization in Africa. And UNIDO is preoccupied with one only question: how to transform the continent's vast potential into prosperity to lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty and support their advancement. The potential is very clearly given. Manufacturing is growing in Africa. It is not yet taking place at a rapid and sustained pace, which we want to induce the structural transformation we need. However, according to our data, manufacturing output in Africa showed a growth of 3.3% in 2022, slightly higher than the global average of 3% in the same period. And that alone underlines the potential we are looking at. Now, UNIDO also sees the rapidly growing middle class in Africa, which has tripled to 330 million people over the last 30 years. That's today approximately 34% of the continent's population. This middle class is projected to grow to 1.1 billion by 2060, which is 42%. And if effectively harnessed, this presents a tremendous opportunity for the continent to increase and to capitalize on the demand of manufactured goods and services. The growth of this middle class can also stimulate the innovation and new ideas within domestic industries, because these are sitting in the driving seat of many economies and companies across the continent. In the context of the African continental free trade area, this growth of the middle class represents a tremendous opportunity to stimulate that productive transformation, which Dr. Duarte has obviously, and with very good reasons, required to all of us. And this is critical for the success and sustainability of the AFCFTA. In addition to its increased purchase power, the middle class will help to initiate and to increase investments we need so much in that transformation. Those investments will spur the structural transformation of African economies and unlock the potential of goods made in Africa for the domestic and obviously for the international market. Harnessing this potential requires the appropriate strategies and policies, large-scale actions on the ground, as well as effective industry agglomerations and innovative industry financing for exactly achieve the higher productivity and the added value generated in the continent in order to support and serve its population beyond the existing numbers, actually. And UNIDO here stands ready to very much support all economies and people in the African continent to precisely achieve these objectives. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, considering all these prospects and challenges, UNIDO and our global partners are committed to scale up the technical assistance to the African countries. And we will continue to pursue that very mandate to promote inclusive and sustainable industrial development, to make the AFCFTA a manufacturing region of global significance. Building on the momentum of the 17th extraordinary session of the Assembly of the African Heads of State and Government on Industrialization and Economic Diversification, UNIDO's forthcoming strategy for Africa 2023-2025 promotes exactly that transformation and change and lays out measures and actions for increased impact at large scale in the African continent. Finally, as the lead agency for the implementation of the third industrialization development decade for Africa, UNIDO will continue to mobilize the entire spectrum of actors that are involved in the industrialization process. With our partners at the local, national, regional level, operating both within and beyond the continent, we are working to exchange knowledge, transfer technologies, and stimulate investments to create the impactful and transformative change that lasts and that we so dearly need in the African continent. I thank you very much for your kind attention, and we're looking very much forward to deliberate with you this morning and the afternoon, and obviously work with all of you over the next months and years to come to achieve those objectives. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Dr. Kai Betke, representing UNIDO. You say how to transform the continent's potential, harnessing this potential, very important. We'll get into that later on in our panel discussion. Up next, I'd like to invite Mr. Muhammad Ali, Director of Trade in Goods and Competition at the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, AFCFTA, joining us from Accra. Muhammad Ali, you have the floor.
Thank you, our very capable moderator, and very good afternoon and good morning from Accra. The host of the AFCFTA Secretariat, my greetings, and I want to start by extending His Excellency the Secretary General thanks and gratitude for the United Nations Under Secretary General and the Advisor for Africa, Her Excellency Ms. Christina Duarte, for giving the AFCFTA and working with the AFCFTA Secretariat the opportunity to co-organize this event. Is very important webinar, very important topic. Distinguished participants, it is a privilege to be here today to give the brief remarks on the growing middle class and the continental import substitution, connecting the dots to unlock Made in Africa and to highlight the role of the African Continental Free Trade Area in this regard. As we all know, Africa is a continent of great potential, and these concepts offer unique opportunity to unlock this potential and drive economic growth and development in Africa. Historically, Africa regions worked toward regional integration. However, the geographical locations of these regions created so many similarities. And by creating one single market for Africa, it is the time to unlock the full potential of the comparative advantage of our rich continent. The relationship between the growing middle class, import substitution, and African Continental Free Trade Area is significant, as it can help to unlock the potential of made in Africa and drive economic growth and development. As the middle class grows, there is a greater demand for consumer goods and services, including consumer goods such as food, clothing, electronics, and household appliances. If these goods continue to be imported from outside, the benefit of the growing middle class may be limited to increase consumption and not necessarily to increase production and our economic prosperity. Import substitution, as we know, refer to policies that encourage local production, and in our case, African local production as one single market of goods that are currently being imported from outside Africa. By promoting local production and consumption, countries can increase their competitiveness within the AfCFTA and their competitiveness when they trade with the rest of the world. African countries can produce and supply goods within the continent, increasing intra-Africa trade and drive economic growth and development. The AfCFTA aims to create a single market for goods and services in Africa by connecting the dots between the growing middle class and the import substitution and the AfCFTA producers. However, it is not the end game to create a single market for trading goods and trading service. The end game should be economic prosperity. The end game should be the creation of value chain, not only to create free market for goods. The growing middle class is a key driver of economic growth. If local production is increased, it can create jobs and stimulate the economy, leading to an improvement in living standards and overall economic growth. This can also help to reduce the dependency on imported goods, which can improve the balances trade and enhance the economic independence of the countries. Under the AfCFTA, we started the journey. This is the third year of implementing the AfCFTA. We finalized the policy framework for the AfCFTA. We finalized the built-in agenda for the AfCFTA. As we speak now, we see trades already started to happen under the AfCFTA Guided Trade Initiative, which is initiative that has been championed by the AfCFTA Secretariat and under the auspices of the Council of Ministers of the AfCFTA. We are seeing also, or we are working on specific programs to build on the market access opportunities to enhance the capacities of our member state for the value chain. But creating value chains and creating a single market without a vision, as Her Excellency mentioned, without a vision of substituting the importation from outside Africa by importation of African products will lead us to nowhere. For us to increase the inter-Africa trade, we need to be able to produce. We should have the appropriate framework to export, and also we should have the demand for African products. That should not mean and will not mean that Africa trade with third countries will be fully substituted. However, what we are looking for, unlocking the full potential of our African integration within Africa. In conclusion, the relationship between the growing middle class and the AfCFTA is critical. African countries must promote African local production and African consumption to unlock the potential of our made in Africa. By doing so, they can increase their competitiveness within the AfCFTA, promote intra-Africa trade, and drive economic growth and development. The AfCFTA provide a unique opportunity for African countries to trade with each other and break down trade barriers. And by leveraging the growing middle class and import substitution, African countries can take full advantage of this opportunity to promote economic growth and development for the benefit of all Africans. I thank you, and I wish you all a fruitful engagement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Muhammad Ali. What you said, growing middle class is a key driver. This is so, so important. And thank you so much for highlighting that. We'll be talking about that. In the meantime, let's set the stage. Again, the topic for today, growing middle class and continental import substitution, connecting the dots to unlock made in Africa. Let's set the stage here with Her Excellency, Ms. Amina Mohammed, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. Take a listen.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Africa's middle class is rapidly expanding. According to the African Development Bank, the middle class in Africa tripled between 1980 and 2010, reaching 313 million people. It now constitutes about 34% of the continent's population, an incredible opportunity to drive economic growth in Africa for generations to come, and an opportunity to make Made in Africa a reality. We must enable the middle class to flourish in Africa and flourish for Africa. And we need to create decent jobs for the middle class to spend their hard-earned money on the continent on African products. First, this means boosting Africa's share of global manufacturing. Currently, Africa's share is a paltry 1.5%. The result is a large part of the growing purchasing power of Africa's middle class being sent overseas. Money that could be spent in Africa is instead spent on expensive imports that affect current accounts, reduce foreign currency reserves, and increase macroeconomic vulnerability to external shocks. It's high time to support and scale up policies and investments that promote Made in Africa manufacturing capabilities and products. Second, we need to tap into the massive potential of the African Continental Free Trade Area, the world's largest single market with over 1.2 billion consumers and a combined GDP of over $3 trillion. By removing trade barriers, the Continental Free Trade Area will make it easier for African countries to establish regional and continental value chains, create jobs, increase manufacturing capabilities, and produce more processed goods locally, all under the Made in Africa label. Third, we need to recognize the contribution that creatives working in fashion, film, and sport make to the continent's GDP and include them in the discussions. They play a significant role in promoting African products and culture, and we should support them as they help to create jobs and grow the economy. Fourth and finally, technology also has a significant role to play as a platform to break down the barriers and to truly make the AFCFTA a reality. By using technology, we can improve trade facilitation, reduce the costs of doing business, and increase transparency, making it easier for business to trade with each other across borders. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the African Continental Free Trade Area and our Made in Africa objectives go hand in hand. Both are perfect tools to enhance Africa's industrialization and improve its competitiveness across global value chains. I look forward to the discussion and concrete recommendations about this issue from this webinar. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Deputy Secretary General, United Nations, Her Excellency, Ms. Amina J. Mohammed, setting the stage for this topic of discussion today, saying 34% of the 1.2 billion population in Africa is middle class, and that could climb to 42% by 2060. In other words, we are literally on the runway waiting to take off. Let me introduce my panel of guests for this afternoon's discussion. I'd like to begin with Her Excellency Ms. Sakai Nzenza. She's Minister of Industry and Commerce in Zimbabwe, joining us from Harare. We also have His Excellency Mr. Francois Kanimba, Commissioner for Common Market, Economic Commerce and Financial Affairs at the Economic Community of the Central African States, ECAS, joining us from Libreville in Gabon. We also have Dr. Amani Asfour, President of the Africa Business Council, joining us from Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, and Ms. Oluranti Doherty, Director, Export Development, the African Export-Import Bank, Afrexim Bank, joining us from Cairo. Welcome all our panelists and guests. Everyone who's joining in, please send in your questions, your comments. We'll be getting to them a little later on. Whatever you want to ask, just put them in the comments and the chats, and I'll ask our guests. In the meantime, I'd like to begin with Her Excellency Dr. Ms. Sekai Nzenza. Minister Nzenza, let me ask you this. African countries are striving to ensure local production of goods and services. Now, in this regard, please share what policies and initiatives your government is implementing towards the promotion of local, sustainable, and inclusive industrial production.
Good afternoon from Zimbabwe. And I noticed some of my colleagues there. Hello, Dr. Amani Asfour. Good to see you. First of all, let me begin by really thanking you for convening this platform, the Africa Dialogue Series 2023, which is not only directly aligned to the ongoing discourse continentally, but it is also true to the current reality in Zimbabwe's economic growth. His Excellency Dr. Edi Mnangagwa, the President of Zimbabwe, in his National Development Strategy policy, he's tasked the Ministry of Industry and Commerce to move up the value chains. Ladies and gentlemen, Zimbabwe, for the past number of years, as you all know, has been somewhat in a difficult economic position. But what is really exciting about Zimbabwe now is that during the past 5 years, we've been implementing our National Development Strategy 1 and also looking specifically at import substitution. We realize that Zimbabwe does a lot of raw materials, particularly in mining and also in agriculture. And let me also say that when COVID struck and our president said, essential services must continue. So we had become a nation of importers. And I know the proverbial anecdote said we were importing even toothpicks, which we could make locally. So when the borders closed during COVID, we really started looking inwards and implementing our local content strategy, and also looking at innovation and bringing in the latest technology. So our main focus was on producing high value, high quality goods. And in order to trade, we also looked at what exactly is in mining, and also the agro-processed foods, whereby as we look more at what's grown locally, we start bringing in the latest technology, and also in terms of what kind of innovation was required. And in particular, the development of sustainable value chains became quite a strong agenda for us. And key was to strengthen the relationship with the private sector. Our policy is to lead a private sector-led growth. And in that regard, we are creating value through value addition and also leaning much more closely on the pillar of competitiveness. Earlier on, Ms. Duarte mentioned that we need to look at continental import substitution in order to strategize and prioritize what's made in Africa. So through our local content policy, we've been focusing on import substitution.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you for that. Just hold that thought there, Madam Minister. And let me go to Commissioner Kanimba and ask you, regional economic organizations are the most potent and effective economic integration and diversification platforms. Please tell us what your organization is doing to unlock the industrial potential in the region and indicate some of the challenges and opportunities in this regard. Commissioner Katim.
Excuse me, I was just sending ECAS Commission greetings to all of you and taking advantage of this to thank you also to associate me to this very important debate. First of all, I'd like to fully agree with the statement that a well-performing REC may be instrumental in facilitating regional economic development and economic diversification. That's a fact. I'm not going right now to discuss about ECAS performance as far as impacting economic integration and diversification is concerned. I'm going really to focus on our vision to see how we can do better. Some of you may know that ECAS, in terms of performance to boost regional integration, has been one of the weakest REC on the continent. By the time being, we are seeing a process of doing or removing the bottlenecks to make this region a free trade one by bringing all the 11 member states needed to implement the regulation which have been set up by statutory organs to make the free trade area operational. The process is very slow, but this is part of our current business actually. But let me, with regard to unlocking the regional industrial potential, what really ECAS is doing, I may say currently we have 3 major programs on which I'd like to talk about in this webinar. The first one is about how do we mainstream private sector in the regional integration agenda. You may wonder how this is a priority for this meeting, but I can tell you when the new ECAS Commission was set up, when we try to understand why this region has been so delaying to make progress compared with others, we realized that also ECAS was the only region where there is no business council operating alongside with the member countries really for an efficient public-private dialogue around the issues of regional integration. So we're in the process of setting up this platform. It's already done. Now it's a question of making it operational to achieve our objectives. At the same time, the business environment in ECAS is a challenge. You may be aware that when you look to all different international organizations trying to rank countries according to the quality of business environment, all the ECAS countries, apart from Rwanda, which has made strong progress in the last 15 years, all the other countries really are at the bottom of the ladder. This sent a very bad signal to the international community, business. There are very, very serious programs really to support business development in ECAS countries, apart from extractive industries for oil and minerals. The promotion of small and medium enterprises development in the ECAS region is a very serious issue. So we are now setting up a comprehensive action plan, country per country and at regional level, to change the business environment. Because definitely this is going to be the basis to create conditions for competitiveness for the small and medium enterprises.
Okay, Doctor.
The third program, Jeff, just excuse me a little bit. The third program, we are engaging our member state to design a comprehensive industrial development strategy and economic diversification, focusing mainly on the potential regional value chain with a high potential in the region. So these are the three main programs which we are focusing right now in the process of see how we can initiate a significant change going forward. I will come later to talk about the challenges and opportunities.
Absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner, for that. Appreciate you setting the stage for that. Let me bring in Dr. Asfour, President of the African Business Council. Now, Dr. Asfour, you know, Thomas Sankara once said, let's make the African market the market of Africans, produce in Africa, transform in Africa, and consumed in Africa. Let's produce what we need and consume what we produce instead of importing. How are Business Council members assisting Africa in actualizing this vision, particularly in the era of the AFCFTA?
So thank you very much, Moderator Chef. Let me first thank very much the organizers, UNIDO, the ACFTA Secretariat, and of course the Office of Special Advisor on Africa, my dear sister, Christina. And also greet my colleagues, Her Excellency, my dear sister, Minister of Zimbabwe, Dr. Sekai, and also His Excellency, my dear brother, Commissioner Kaimba, and all the great panelists. So the vision, our vision, this comes with the same vision of the Africa Business Council, which is a competitive, borderless, innovative Africa for trade, investment, and industrialization. So this is actually our founding vision. And Africa Business Council, as established in line with the Heads of State Decision Summit, within the architecture of ACFTA, as you can see here, I have my Africa Business Council, the ACFTA logos behind me, because we are actually established to fast track the implementation of ACFTA and increase our intra-Africa trade. So in doing this, the Africa Business Council is inclusive of all the voices of the private sector. My brother, Commissioner Kaimba, was talking about ECAS Business Council, where Africa Business Council supported the establishment of ECAS Business Council to be part of the inclusive membership. So within Africa Business Council, we have actually COMESA Business Council sit on our board, SADC Business Council, ECAS Business Council, we're going recruited to be part of us, OSCE Chambers of Commerce of West Africa, East Africa Chamber of Commerce, Pan-African Chambers of Commerce, Pan-African Manufacturer Association, women entrepreneurs, youth entrepreneurs, SMEs, corporates. So this is actually the voice of the African private sector that is geared towards our industrialization agenda. And having said that, the middle class is really very important with reference to pursuing this vision, because there is strong relation between the growth of the middle class and the strengthening of the private sector. So to realize our vision, which is exactly the same vision as you said with Thomas Sankara, how do we have what we need, how to add value to our natural resources in Africa, and how to build capacity of our human resources in Africa. Because if we, as Africa Business Council, which is the voice of the private sector, we have a strategy, we call it the triad of empowerment. And those triad of empowerment brings 3 pillars together, the 3 P's. It's about private sector strengthening, including SMEs, women and youth, policy advocacy, and product development. So within the private sector strengthening, including SMEs and women and youth, our program is really about building capacity, awareness, information, promotion of entrepreneurship for our private sector, building capacity of our private sector by establishing business development centers, business incubators. It's really about how this private sector will be able to gear the agenda of industrialization and substitute import, because the whole issue of substituting import is to really have a made in Africa product. And this brings us to the second pillar, which is the policy advocacy. What do we need? If Sankara says that we need to consume what's on the continent and we don't import, or we have, according to import substitution, the policy advocacy with the heads of states, with the governments, and this is actually our role as Africa Business Council to be the premier advocacy arm. We need to have an enabling environment for business, enabling environment for investment, incentives, but also one of the strong pillar advocacy pillars is to have at least 40% of all government procurement goes to African private sector, because by this time we are going to see how we have the mapping exercise of what's existing on the continent, and what's existing on the continent, on the African soil, cannot be brought from outside. So this is one thing that we are calling all governments to have at least 40% for government procurement to African private sector. Second pillar is of advocacy, is about how we have financial inclusion, access to credit, to incentives. On the third pillar, which is product development, and that's what we are talking about, and my sister Christina talked about, and all of us, is made in Africa product, which is strong, value added, competitive, standardized. It's very important to have the standardization and harmonization of all the regulations across our whole African continent. Because if we have one product, we cannot register each product in each African country, but we should have this recommendation. And to make an African product competitive and value added, we need to know what are the natural resources present on our continent. My sister, Dr. Sekai, she talked about minerals. One of the programs we are talking about now is really how to add value to our minerals and not to export it as such. So we have a lot of minerals across the continent, especially even with the DRC and Zambia now talking about the lithium batteries in 2030. We will have 200 million electrical vehicles, and they need batteries, lithium batteries. This is how we manufacture on our continent the lithium batteries for the use, and not sending our minerals outside. The same issue goes for minerals like gemstones. We all know that all gemstones goes to Jaipur, India, to be cut and polished there. One of the programs we are doing in Africa Business Council is establishing training centers for cutting and polishing our own stones and value adding on it. So this would not happen except also if we have industrial parks, if we have special economic zones, if we have the government support public-private sector dialogue and partnership, and to really make sure that the African private sector have the lead in all negotiations across the table, and to make sure that all of us as private sector come together with governments, with institutions like UNIDO, with all the support of Office of Special Advisor or ACFTA. We are established in line with the same summit or decision of establishing ACFTA. So ACFTA, in order to realize it, we need to work together and to make sure with all these advocacy pillars for the private sector to make sure that we manage our own resources and we industrialize with a skilled labor. And that's why middle class is very important, because they actually provide the purchasing power. So we need a single market. They provide skilled labor with education. And this is really why we are working together to see how this can happen.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Asfor. Very well said. Very well said. Let me go to Oluranti Doherty. She's the Director, Export Development at the Afri-Exim Bank. And let me ask you, Afri-Exim Bank is one of the institutions that is very active in the promotion of African trade, including through the AFCFTA. Could you please give us some insights into the initiatives that the bank is promoting and how this is contributing to Africa's industrialization?
Thank you, Jeff. Good afternoon to all of my fellow panelists. It is indeed a pleasure for the Afri-Exim Bank to participate in the African Dialogue Series 2023. And we indeed are very pleased to have a team that relates to what we promote in the bank and what we drive primarily. As you know, Afri-Exim Bank is a multilateral trade finance institution set up to promote intra and extra African trade. And under our 6th strategic plan, we have been pursuing strategies that are anchored on 2 key pillars. The first pillar is promoting intra-African trade and the AFCFTA implementation, while the second pillar is industrialization and export development. The principal objectives of promoting these 2 pillars is to diversify and transform Africa's trade away from the reliance of primary commodities and to promote and encourage domestic production for local consumption. And under this, we've come up with about 6 flagship initiatives that I'll just be talking briefly upon this afternoon. The first, of course, is the AFCFTA Adjustment Fund. Under this initiative, Afri-Exim Bank is working with African governments to establish an adjustment fund that comprises of 3 sub-funds, the base fund, the credit fund, and the general fund. This fund is mainly to help African countries adjust to the new trade regime that will be established or that has been established under the AFCFTA. It will assist our member countries to cope with short-term revenue or tariff loss and to support the private sector to access funding required to boost production of value-added goods and services. To this end, Afri-Exim Bank has already committed 1 billion to the credit fund and 10 billion to the base fund. And we have been working with our partners to mobilize an estimated 10 billion for the adjustment fund over the next 10 years. Apart from the adjustment fund, we've also been working on the Africa Collaborative Transit Guarantee. One of the things that most of my fellow speakers have alluded to is the fact that we need to ensure African countries can trade amongst themselves seamlessly, ruling out trade barriers or tariff barriers. And we have created the African Collaborative Transit Guarantee to facilitate the movement of goods under a single transit bond to support the AFCFTA. What I mean by this is for us to be able to move goods from Johannesburg to Cairo under a single transit bond, as opposed to what we have currently, where you have to post a transit bond at each border and preventing movement of goods and services and trade amongst our countries. The bank has already set aside 1 billion for the entire continent, of which 200 million has been earmarked for the Comesa region, where we are piloting this scheme. And we expect that once this scheme is fully operational, it's going to lead to cost savings for African private businesses of about 300 million a year. Apart from this, we are also pursuing the Industrial Parks and Special Economic Zones initiative. I'm glad that Dr. Asfor mentioned that creating special economic zones are one of the ways that you can boost industrialization, value addition on the continent. And through the initiative, we've been addressing both hard and soft infrastructure constraints that inhibit industrialization and African trade, intra-African trade. We've disbursed over 700 million for the development of industrial parks in 3 countries, Gabon, Togo, and Benin. And we've been able to see these industrial parks develop and, manufacturing entities, take over, start operations within these zones. And currently we have about 2 billion worth of pipelines to work on in terms of developing industrial parks in countries like Cote d'Ivoire, Malawi, Botswana, Kenya, the DRC, Zambia, Rwanda, and Nigeria. So these are some of the things we've been focusing on. And apart from that, it's not just enough for you to develop industrial parks. How about how whatever is produced within these industrial parks, how do they export within the continent and even outside of the continent, ensuring that they meet the standards at export markets. We have also created or launched an initiative called the Africa Quality Assurance Center that seeks to establish testing, inspection, and certification centers across the country. Towards this center, we've devoted about $100 million, and we commissioned the first of these centers in Nigeria in December 2022 in Ogun State, and it's already functional and operational. We are looking to commence the development of the second Africa Quality Assurance Center in East Africa, commencing this year. Apart from this, we've also played a very key role in the automotive initiatives on the continent. For instance, we supported the completion of an automotive value chain study for ECOWAS, and right now we are working with the African Association of Automotive Manufacturers, AAAM, the African Union, and the AFCFTA Secretariat to extend this study to the entire continent. Apart from this, we've also, provided a $1 billion global automotive financing facility at the disposal of automotive companies that seek to establish on the continent and produce on the continent. Dr. Asfor, you also mentioned one of the initiatives that we've been driving, that's Afreximbank. This is the DRC Zambia Battery Precursor Initiative that we've been working on with UNECA, where we seek to ensure that, gone will be the days where DRC and Zambia export their lithium, their cobalt, their nickel unprocessed, but rather we had value in these products and produce battery precursors. We are setting up special economic zones in these two countries, and I'm pleased to let you know that last month we executed framework agreements with the two countries and commenced work on the pre-feasibility study. Kickoff meetings were held last week in both Zambia and DRC, and work is already under development. The last I will mention of these initiatives that we've been working on keenly, because we know that the success of the AFCFTA is what can boost localization of industry, value addition, and indeed economic growth for our continent. And that is why we have been set up. So one of the last initiatives that we have been promoting is the Biennial Intra-African Trade Fair, which has been branded the AFCFTA Marketplace. And it's up and running thanks to 20 million support from Afreximbank and donations that we've also received from our equally committed partners. This fair has gone through 2 editions. The first edition was held here in Cairo, Egypt, and the second edition was held in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. It had an aggregate of over 39,000 people attending the 2 fairs, and it seeks to bring together African business, small SME businesses, to let them showcase their products and services globally and to be able to connect into not just the regional value chain, but global value chain. And these are some of the initiatives that we've aggressively pushed in Afreximbank and are still focusing on, and welcome partners to support us in ensuring their success. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ms. Doherty. Very well said and very well put. And let me go back to Dr. Sakai Nzenza, Minister of Industry and Commerce in Zimbabwe, and ask you this. You heard Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Amina Mohammed, saying that the middle class in Africa has tripled to 313 million, which is approximately 34% of the continent's population. Now, over the past 30 years, and is expected to reach 1.1 billion, or 42% by the year 2060. The question is, what does Africa need to do to take advantage of this? And what is Zimbabwe doing in particular?
In Zimbabwe. And our key strategy is to focus on manufacturing. More recently, ladies and gentlemen, Zimbabwe is beginning to show the benefits of increased manufacturing. We have the Confederation of Zimbabwe Industries survey, which was done at the end or earlier this year. And it has shown that there's been an investment of 101 million invested into the country in order to expand the capacity of manufacturing. And as a result, our capacity utilization has increased from 56% in 2021 to right now it's at 66%. and also looking at locally produced goods. As I had said earlier, before COVID, you'd really struggle to find locally manufactured goods in Zimbabwe. We were below 40%. But right now, focusing mainly on the middle class needs, we have increased our shelf occupancy in supermarkets of locally produced goods to 80%. But what we're also realizing is the middle class has got different lifestyle habits, which link in very strongly to our locally produced goods, and also looking at bringing in the latest technology. Let me give you an example. We're making the linkages between manufacturing and also agriculture. For the first time in the history of Zimbabwe, we've got the highest bumper harvest in wheat production. During the past few years, we had started to import wheat into Zimbabwe, and you can realize the cost of production of bread was a lot higher. But this year, we're actually celebrating the fact that not only are we looking at wheat, but we're looking, firstly, at the needs of the middle class. Secondly, bringing in the latest technology and innovation. And thirdly, looking at the food habits of the growing middle class. I'll give you an example, which comes directly to the role of the Secretary General of the AFCTA. Last year, he was able to facilitate a relationship between the government of Zimbabwe, Ministry of Industry, to bring in the Bula Group, which is a company based in Switzerland. And we've brought them in to Zimbabwe through the private sector initiatives, where they are going to be producing noodles for the first time. I'm just giving a practical example. And also looking at spaghetti. Whereas in the past, the middle class in Zimbabwe were not really looking more closely at what can be produced locally through innovation. So this is just one example of what it is that we're doing. And I also want to add to what Ms. Doherty had said when she mentioned the agro-industrial park. Zimbabwe and Zambia are already establishing a common agro-industrial park. And this is based on comparative advantages in the agricultural sector. And this we are using as a starting point for strengthening cooperation. And this will be the first of its kind in Southern Africa. So I'm hoping that the Afrexim Bank will come in to support us. Already in the feasibility stage, we have a commitment from COMESA. And I'm just one last point. Yes. I know Dr. Amani Asfo spoke about lithium in the DRC, lithium value addition. Zimbabwe has got the second highest deposits of lithium, second to the DRC. So we are looking at a single market within AFCTA for Zimbabwean mineral beneficiation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sakai. And I'm sure Ms. Doherty is listening to you, and Afrexim Bank will respond to you very shortly on your request. In the meantime, let's go back to Commissioner Kanimba and ask you this. ECAS has been collaborating with institutions such as UNIDO. Please highlight some of the key cooperation areas and mention what more such institutions can do to support productive transformation and industrialization at the regional level.
Well, thank you, Jeff. It's true. We are in a process of working with UNIDO to see how to establish an institutional capacity at ECAS level to be in a position really to provide the necessary support to drive some of the key value chain potential in the area. In this region. Just to take a few examples, 7 out of 11 members of the ECAS countries are producing oil. This region is very rich in natural resources, but as have been said, still exporting raw materials in terms of activities. Even those who have been trying to add value, it's at a very low stage of transforming these resources. Now, when you see the potential for oil value chain development in this region, there is a need for a strong capacity building to be in a position to support the countries ready to develop regional refineries, not just every country going its own to set up a refinery which can't achieve the economy of scale to be viable. So for this to happen, this was just an example. We need to set up an institutional capacity at the ECAS level to advise countries and even support them to make feasibility studies and to mobilize private investors in public-private partnership for this to happen. So this is something on which we are working with UNIDO to see how to set up such kind of institution and how we can make these operational, not just centralized the way, but trying to work with countries who already have a comparative advantage in different value chain areas to build on their experience. This is what we are doing. Going forward, while setting up or building this huge capacity, as I said, we have already small and medium enterprises who are struggling to do something in the region, but facing very serious challenges in terms of quality infrastructure and market access capacity, because they are very small, working from their own. They are faced with very terrible logistical challenges to access the market. So there is a need for setting up a specific program to facilitate SMEs really to access market by addressing these different bottlenecks I've been just mentioning. The program is underway, and we have a number of development partners who are expressing interest, like EU to join and support. And we have a lot of expectation from such kind of partnership.
Okay, absolutely. Well done. Very good. Dr. Asfour, let me ask you this, and you were talking about this earlier on in your opening address. You were saying the private sector is the engine of Africa's industrialization. So please highlight some of the opportunities and challenges surrounding Africa's industrialization and highlight what needs to be improved.
So thank you very much. We understand very much that industrialization by itself cannot happen except with multi-factors. If we, as my brother said, which is reference to infrastructure, it's about energy. It's about really empowering the private sector. It's about the mapping exercise of what's existing on the continent for this industrialization process. And also it's about empowering the real African private sector, which really majority is the small and medium enterprises. And this is what we really need to see how we empower our SMEs, which is the backbone of our economy, and make sure that those SMEs, including women and youth, are players within the whole market. So under Africa Business Council, we have more than 20 clusters, which speaks to trade, investment, industry, in business linkages, SMEs, financial services, energy, fashion industry, creative industries, infrastructure, ICT and digital economy, transport and logistics, women entrepreneurs, SMEs, youth, oil and gas, mineral development, resources, because under each of those committee, there is a private sector entity which is chairing this committee and galvanize and collecting the data. Our problem in Africa is also information. In order for industrialization to happen, we need to see what is existing on the continent and how we add value to it using the expertise on the continent, because linking to scientific research and technology is huge of importance. We are not capitalizing on the presence of the scientific expertise within our continent to have industrial designs to really promote our industrialization agenda. Take a small thing like in West Africa, the shea butter. Shea butter is used in international cosmetics, and it is sold by millions and millions, while our women on the West Africa, they don't have access really to packaging, branding, designing, even scientific research with Yes, I can see my sister Christina clapping, because this is what we need. We have all the resources of the world. I need to see how we standardize this product. I need to have special hygienic, certificates for it, intellectual properties for it, good, nice packaging. And then with this value addition on only one product like shea butter, it produces billions of dollars for our entrepreneurs. So this is some things that we really need to know. As exactly like we are just exporting the cocoa beans without having it as powder. It's the same thing. Like, why do we have really, my sister talked about the minerals. Now, under the Mineral Development Committee, will be organizing the Africa Mineral Development Summit, not Africa mining. There is a huge difference between mining and mineral development. The mineral development is how we have manifestation to our minerals present on the continent. And that's exactly what we are talking about, industrialization. If we're talking about green economy now and renewable energy, how do I equip my dear young entrepreneurs with reference to technologies for solar dryers, for solar stoves, for making sure that we empower them even at the rural area. Another issue with blue economy. We're talking about industrialization. All the blue economy, Africa is actually about 18,000 nautical miles, where all the surrounded by the sea, by the oceans. How are we empowering in aquaculture, in fisheries? How are we really creating all this? So this is really the role of the real industrialization, is to see what's existing on our continent, our resources, linking it with science and technology, linking it with the capacity building of our skilled laborers, using technology and having access to a market. We are 1.3 billion people, a huge market, but we need to link ourselves. That's why under Africa Business Council, we have business linkages. So we had several sessions where the first time the Chambers of Commerce from West Africa meeting with COMESA Business Council, with SEDC Business Council, with Penny Manufacturing Association to know what is on the continent and how we really add value on it. So the whole issue of industrialization is a multifactorial. We need to empower our private sector and to have public-private sector dialogue for incentives. My private sector, if they want to invest in industrialization on the continent, they find that multinational companies coming on the continent having more incentives than our African private sector. We need to see how we do this together in order to empower private sector for investment in industrialization.
Absolutely. Thank you, Doctor. Well said, well put. Oluranti Dorji, let me come back to you. And you mentioned earlier on about limited finance as being one of the critical challenges of the African private sector. What kind of support is Afreximbank providing in this regard, and in particular to support Africa's industrialization through intra-Africa trade?
So thank you, Jeff. Afreximbank, to mitigate the challenge around limited finance usually faced by private sector investors trying to advance industrialization on the continent. We've developed robust products profile that cost across advisory, debt financing, equity financing, project preparation, to be able to support these investors. For instance, we have our trade financing facilities that seeks to provide letters of credit, pre-export finance, payment guarantees, factoring solutions to African businesses. And up to date, as at December 2022, we had group assets of funded and unfunded facilities to African entities of about 31.1 billion. With about 1.5 billion being in trade facilities and guarantees. One of the things we also did was, because if we're going to change the spin around industrialization, development of infrastructure, promotion of value addition on the continent, we also have to include services sector. We developed a product called Intra-Africa EPC Facility, where we seek to support African EPC contractors to win contracts for developing of trade enabling and industrial infrastructure across the continent. For instance, the annual market for EPC projects in Africa is estimated as around 60 billion, but it's dominated by foreign entities who are fully supported by their home country through government policy and the financial institution called Export Credit Agency, who make money available at their disposal. But what we have done as Afreximbank is to ensure that we also support African companies to be at par with foreign entities when they are bidding for development of infrastructure projects on the continent. And to date, we have supported African countries across the continent, Egypt, Nigeria, Mozambique, to win contracts valued at about 12 billion. We believe that this is also in contribution to what we are talking about, industrial development, infrastructure development. We also have our project financing facilities. These are limited recourse financing facilities that are provided for the development of industrial parks, light and heavy manufacturing, power projects, ports, telecoms, and up to date, we've disbursed within the last 4 years about 3 billion with over 10 billion projects in pipeline. One of the things we've had difficulties in is moving these projects from concepts to reality and bankable projects. And we noticed that, African project promoters struggle to, put their projects together in a way that can attract debt and equity financing. And we set up what we call the Afreximbank Project Preparation Facility, where we support public and private entities in our member countries prepare projects that will attract equity and debt financing. And the project preparation unit provides funding for the development of feasibility study, technical studies, and also financial assistance to actually implement this project. And to date, they've been preparing projects worth a pipeline of 2 billion across the continent. We also have our advisory services team that supports these African businesses to attract equity and debt financing. And over the last 5 years, they've been able to help raise about 1.7 billion in debt and about 1.1 billion in equity. But looking at that, we know that everybody recognizes that Afreximbank provides, solutions in terms of banking, debt financing. But we also realize that, promoters also, face the issues around attracting equity. And so we also set up a subsidiary company called the Fund for Export Development in Africa. And the Fund for Export Development in Africa provides investments in equity or quasi equity in African corporates and African SMEs within the manufacturing, industrial, and infrastructure value chain. And they are set up because we know that we have to fill the equity funding gap that amounts to about 110 billion per annum in these critical sectors that can turn around the economy of our continent. So these are some of the things we are doing and we are offering. And just to speak to the honorable minister's question to us, are we willing to support? Absolutely. In fact, we are willing to support the development of the industrial park projects, the Zimbabwe project, just the same as we are supporting the DRC Zambia battery precursor initiative. We are funding the pre-feasibility study on behalf of these two governments. And it's not going to just focus on these two countries. It's going to ensure that we can create a regional solution that can ensure that other countries who have resources can also tap into this. So I will be connecting with the person working on the feasibility so that my colleagues in Harare can reach out to you, madam, to see how we can link Zimbabwe into the pre-feasibility study that we are currently doing for the DRC Zambia initiative. And then lastly, we have also developed a suite of programs for SMEs, because I realized that most people will say, oh, you know, you are just looking at infrastructure projects, you are looking at maybe corporates, but we also realize that there's need to support the development of SMEs across all value chains. So we set up what we call the Export SME Development Program. It provides financial and non-financial interventions to SMEs. The financial intervention comes in terms of providing financing through intermediaries and sometimes directly to these SMEs. And then the non-financial intervention comes through the provision of capacity building support to these SMEs through incubation and accelerator program. For instance, this year we have set aside about 5 million to be able to support capacity and acceleration programs for the non-financial interventions. And for the financial interventions, just to mention some critical sectors we are looking at include agro-processing, light manufacturing, the creative sector, and the services sector, because we realize that these key sectors are, big employers of labor. They connect to youth and they connect to women, and you can make an impact in terms of reaching out to small, medium-scale enterprises. So thank you.
Thank you. And I'm sure Minister Nzenza has heard you well, and you can connect and speak in a little short while. In the meantime, there's lots of comments coming in from our chat, because we are going live, obviously, and a lot of people are asking. One question that keeps coming over and over, and I'll open this to the floor, is a question of electricity on the continent. Someone saying that 600 million Africans have no access to electricity, and that is obviously a factor. Who's going to respond to this?
Well, I
Dr.
can.
Asfo, yeah.
Yes, of course, that is very important, because as I mentioned, industrialization without energy and electricity, we are not really harnessing the potential within our African continent, whether it is a solar energy, thermal energy, wind energy. So it is very important, as I mentioned, to see how we invest in our renewable energy, even within the whole sectors that we have, to energize our African continent. So this has to be done with private sector and public-private sector partnership, where we need, as African private sector, invest incentives. We need financing. We need to see how we really have an enabling business environment, because some investor will say, if I put money in this country, am I able to get it back or not? So the enabling environment is a huge, huge, huge impediment with reference to investment. And because it is well known that Africa has 40% potential of all the energy across the whole world, but we need really to see how we harness it.
Absolutely. Well put. Well put. Another question is, and maybe I can direct this to Mr. Muhammad Ali at the AFCFTA. Someone was saying that getting a visa to travel from one country to another is also a big challenge, a big impediment, especially with, talking about one continent, trading within the continent. Is that going to be possible, achievable sometime soon?
Thank you so much. I think this is the hardest question of them. Also, the question I see, it has maybe link also with the single airspace we have in Africa. And if we all recall, back in Kigali, the single market protocol together with the AFCFTA were present in the same room in front of the heads of states, and they signed both of them. Another effort and another progress were hope to happen on the era of the visa and the e-visa. We're seeing many countries that took volunteer actions to ease their visa requirements. Others, they are still not doing that. So there is two ways of addressing that. in terms of policy space, in terms of maybe regulations and protocols, agreements, everything is ready for the member state to take the ownership on the level of parliaments and the level of maybe actual implementation. In my humble view, I think the AFCFTA should tackle that from the other end. Of course, it is not under the AFCFTA. The AFCFTA should tackle that from the other end by creating trade opportunities, by creating value chains, by creating jobs, by creating complementarity between the different countries. We're seeing the examples between the special economic zones on the borders, by creating the need for the workforce that can generate maybe ideas or can support or encourage the government to take actual steps to activate the easier visa requirements. On the other hand, and in a more specific to the AFCFTA maybe action, we have under the Trade and Service Protocol, we have provisions that will allow easy visa requirements and special visa arrangement for businessmen, for the businesses who are doing business under the AFCFTA. I hope that was inclusive for all the Africans, but as the AFCFTA is concerned, we have already under the AFCFTA Trade and Service Protocol provision for the businesses. I thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And Cristina Duarte, you've been paying attention, listening very keenly to this discussion. And someone was asking, we are on the verge of what they're calling a change maker for unlocking Made in Africa. The question a lot of people are asking is there political goodwill?
Thank you, Jeff. First of all, I would like to thank the panelists for such outstanding interventions. Thank you very much. Jeff, very quickly, Africa has been captured, chronically captured, much before COVID, much before climate change, by three paradoxes. The financing paradox, the energy paradox, and the food systems. Unless we build political will, we consolidate a vision to address this paradox chain, in 20 years, maybe older, white hair will be saying the same.
Yeah.
We'll be saying the same. So let's start for the financing paradox. Because when you talk about energy, the bottleneck is energy finance, because we know that international markets, with all my due respect, are full of conditionalities. Everybody knows in this webinar. Let's start for the financing paradox. As we speak, Jeff, Africa loses on an annual basis more than $200 billion. We lose 77 billion in efficient public spending. We lose 88 billion on illicit financial flows. We lose 46 billion in ineffective, inefficient tax incentives. And we have $1.3 trillion from pension funds serving other development goals, not Africa. So we need to address this. So we are rich in financial resources, not in natural resources. Everybody knows that we have almost everything. And now that we are talking about the electric vehicles, again, Africa is the leading on this approach. But we are rich in financial resources. We lose money. So we need to stop, reset, and asking ourselves, what have you been missing here? Unless we start addressing financing for development as something that needs to be internally driven, not ODA, not ODA. ODA has become marginal. As we speak, Africa already finances its own development. $900 billion come from Africans' tax revenues and Africa private savings. ODA, 55 billion. If we add ODA plus FDI, if we add, illicit financial flows are bigger. So we need to put these numbers and say, what have we been missing? What needs to be reset? Because unless we unlock financing for development in Africa, we'll be completely unable to unlock energy finance. And if we do not unlock energy finance, we do not unlock energy technology, energy access. And as my dear sister Amani says, if we do not unlock energy, in 20 years' time, we'll be saying the same. We cannot.
Absolutely.
So in the last 6 years, Jeff, we have been a dark continent. We cannot still be a dark continent in the next 25 years. No. So I do believe that to address all these questions, to really structure, as you mentioned, structure an inflection point, we need to address these three paradoxes that have been captured Africa. Back to you, Jeff.
Absolutely. And you know what, Undersecretary General, when I come back here in 20 years' time, I want to talk about the successes of Africa, not the same subject. All right, to my panelists, we're almost coming to the end of the session, but I'd like to give you each 2 minutes, just 2 minutes, to conclude the way forward. And I'd like to start with Her Excellency Sakai Nzenza, Minister for Industry and Commerce in Zimbabwe. 2 minutes to talk about the way forward. Give us some hope on the continent going forward.
Thank you, Jeff. And I just want to say, from a Zimbabwean perspective, there's definitely a political will. And mapping the way forward, we'll need three fundamental issues. One is for us as Africans to look at research and development and develop shared knowledge and also share innovation. And secondly, for Zimbabwe, we're looking at developing a policy alignment that is very much in alignment with the African Union's industrialization agenda. We've actually come to the end of our industrial development policy, which ended in around mid-2023. So we're now looking at finding that collaboration and partnership to be well aligned with Africa's industrialization agenda. And finally, Jeff, I would like us to look within the AFCTA framework to look at diversification of our value-added products and also standardization and competitiveness. Now, these are the areas that I see require a lot of collaboration, particularly from UNIDO. Thank you once again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Minister. Very well said. Very well said. Commissioner Kanimba, what are your thoughts moving forward? Commissioner, I think you're still muted. Commissioner, you're muted.
Yeah, I just want to highlight 2 points. The first one, for the industrialization of Africa strategy to succeed, there is really a need for a collective responsibility. Political engagement is necessary, but a global private goodwill is also going to be critical. What I mean, when I see, for example, how we have strongly established trade relationships with colonial powers, where multinationals from developed countries have already contracted with some of the countries we are talking about to extract minerals, oil, to supply their manufacturing facilities in developed countries. To reverse this trend is not to be an easy task. It's not going to be an easy task if these multinationals are not willing to relocate these facilities in Africa to facilitate the development of some of the key value chain, for example, in the oil industry, minerals development. It's going to be very difficult. It's going to be very difficult. On the other side, when I see, for example, the region where I am speaking from, ECAS, this region has a variable land and ecological diverse ecosystem to develop agriculture. But there is no agriculture in most of the countries we talk about. And when you go to markets, it looks like you are in Europe towns in terms of supplying the market with food. There is no link between farmers in this area with the market for the middle class citizen you have been talking about. There is really a need for a political turnaround for this trend to be reversed. And there is also a need for a very strong support from development partners for this to happen. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Commissioner. Appreciate that. Dr. Amani Asfour, your thoughts going forward?
So thank you very much. I think going forward, we need really to coordinate our efforts and collaborate and have integration. All of us are doing great things, but we really need to maximize this, amplify our efforts by coordinating our efforts. And for me, I always say that we have everything in our hands. We know the solutions and we know the challenges, but how we make it. We heard my sister from AfriExim talking about SME development program. We have an SME development program. You need to have an SME development. All of us have, ACFTA is working, African Union. We need to come together, all of us, and put things together and make sure that we are all going on the right track. Maximizing our efforts and having a real impact is by coordinating our efforts. That's number one, integration. I call them, they are the 10 ins. Number one is integration, that I just talked about it. Number two is the indigenous capacity building of our African private sector, including SMEs, women and youth. Internal policy reforms and political wills. Infrastructure development, whether physical or soft infrastructure and energy, increase productivity to high productive sectors and moving from the lower productive sectors. Of course, innovation, scientific research and technology, information and communication. Without information, we go nowhere. There are a lot of money on the continent. On the other hand, nobody knows about it. There is a lot of trade agreements, a lot of policy papers. We need information to come among ourselves. And of course, investment and access to credit, intellectual property rights, a standardization of regulations, intergenerational dialogue, and bringing the youth on table, because we are more than 60% of our African population is youth. That's why we have a program called Hunting for Africa's Unicorns, which is about promoting our youth coming together. So industrialization come at the end of the 10 ins, but without those going together and integrating our efforts and communicating among ourselves, I think it will be very, very difficult. But I am very optimistic that if all of us come together, I always say, as our African proverb says, if you want to go fast, you go alone. But if we want to go far, we go together. Thank you.
Absolutely. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Well done, Dr. Asfour. Finally, Ms. Oluranti Dorji, your final thoughts going forward.
Thank you. Lashing on to Dr. Asfour's comments on us going together. I just want to assure everyone that Afreximbank is open for partnership and collaboration. We've aggressively pushed this, even with Africa Business Council. We've gone into several collaborations with UNECA. We've gone into several collaborations and UNIDO, and even with our member countries, and we stand poised to continue to do so. We also stand poised to continue to fulfill our mandate, which is promote intra and extra-African trade. We'll continue to ensure we provide financing to industrial development across the continent. We believe that we must always be there where additionality is required. And I'm talking of projects that are not attractive to foreign investors or foreign banks to finance because they are greenfield with a lot of risk and a lot of potential issues to cope up. Afreximbank is there to finance such projects, especially where they promote industrialization, value addition, and development of our country and continents. So we are there to support here. And then also we are there to support with provision of trade facilitation, policy advocacy, capacity building, in terms of linking to organizations who provide these, both public, private, and NGOs. We are partnering with all these organizations to ensure that we skill up, because we know that one of the reasons why we are witnessing high level of brain drain on the continent is also because of lack of skills and capacity building, and we are investing in this. We are also focusing on providing support to youth and women-led businesses, and we'll continue to do this because we know that it is only through these initiatives that we can change the continent. And we are open to collaborate with various stakeholders on our export SME development program to push our financing interventions and our non-financing interventions, and also all our AFCFTA-led interventions, which of course are geared towards industrialization and export development. Thank you for inviting me to this very interesting panel, and I thank my other co-panelists for very interesting conversations.
And thank you, Ms. Doherty. Very well put, all of you. Thank you so much for those wonderful, wonderful comments. And yes, giving us hope moving forward. Before I let you all go, I'd like to invite Her Excellency Ambassador Fatima Chari Mohammed. She's the permanent observer of the African Union to the United Nations, to give us some closing remarks. Excellency.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeff. And what a very, very interesting panel. Good morning to you all. And on behalf of my sister, USG Duarte, and our co-organizers, I'd like to really thank the panelists and all of the participants for their invaluable contributions, and also to our audience for joining today's discussion. Such an important topic on middle class and import substitution in driving economic growth and development in Africa. It has been a very interesting discussion, and it was also very interesting listening to some of the very practical and concrete examples presented by our various panelists today. And I do agree with you, Jeff. It is important for us to go beyond theory to really speak about what we are actually doing that is right. And hopefully very soon we'll be talking in a more positive sense in terms of what we've been able to achieve. But I think the various examples that were showcased today also goes to show that we are doing a lot, but we still do have a lot of work to do. Now, without attempting to summarize what was already said, just permit me in my closing remarks to highlight some of the key messages that we heard this morning, which I hope you will all take away with you. First of all, it is clear that there is an increasing middle class, and this indicates economic prosperity, social stability, human development, and this will spark innovation and development of industries and technology. And as we look to the future, the middle class will continue to be a key driver for economic growth in Africa. This rise as a result of urbanization, education, and social development presents a tremendous opportunity for sustainable and inclusive industrialization. And the increase in demand for goods and various services open up new opportunities for businesses and entrepreneurs to develop and expand, resulting in job creation and economic growth. With a population projected to reach 1.1 billion by 2060, our continent and the middle class that is set to grow rapidly provide a significant market for locally produced goods and services. The more robust the private sector, the stronger the middle class. And micro, small, and medium enterprises, 65% of them informal, create 70 to 80% of jobs and contribute 30 to 35% of GDP. It is imperative to support them and promote entrepreneurship, including implementing measures targeting women and youth, and including capacity building and facilitating access to market and finance. For this potential to be fully realized, we must also address the issue of import substitution. And import substitution has long been recognized as a key strategy for promoting economic development in Africa. By reducing reliance on imported goods and promoting local production, we can stimulate investment and build a more resilient and self-sufficient economy. Successful import substitution strategies supported by an growing African middle class can have a positive impact on the continent's overall economic performance. The importance of import substitutions as a means of reducing our dependence on foreign goods and services was emphasized several times. Manufacturing also has the potential to increase productivity, encourage innovation and exports, and add value to raw materials, all of which can contribute to Africa's economic transformation. African countries must develop their domestic manufacturing capabilities rather than relying on commodities exports. We must also recognize the importance of trade, both with the rest of the world and within Africa. And in this case, the African Continental Free Trade Area comes in. And the CFTA is a game changer for Africa's economic development. And this historic agreement represents a major step towards a more integrated, prosperous, and united Africa. It'll create a single market for goods and services and will promote intra-African trade, reduce trade barriers, and create new opportunities for businesses across the continent. In addition, through promoting economic diversification and competitiveness and strengthening industrial development and productive capacity, the CFTA promises to foster inclusive growth, expand massive opportunities for economic participation, including for women and youth, and to contribute to lifting millions of Africans out of poverty. But to fully realize the benefits of the CFTA, we must also address the challenges that come with it. And this includes improving infrastructure, reducing non-tariff barriers, and ensuring that the benefits of trade are shared equitably across all African countries. It also means promoting local production and building the capacity of African businesses to compete in the global market. And in this vein, we also need to explore the potential of regional value chains. This requires addressing several challenges that I mentioned, but also includes the limitations to financial access, weak institutions, and some of the regulatory barriers that we have. We also need to ensure that the regional value chains are inclusive and benefit all countries and stakeholders, particularly our SMEs, as well as youth and women-owned businesses. And lastly, in order to achieve these goals, just to wrap it up, we need to work together as a continent, and coordination here is key. We also need to continue to invest in education and skills development, promote entrepreneurship and innovation, and create an enabling environment for business to thrive. Ensuring the benefits of economic growth and shared equity is ensuring that no one is left behind. Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, I think the discussions and insights shared will help us in terms of shaping our conversations as we move forward and in achieving the future that we want to see for Africa's economic transformation. I thank you for your attention.
And thank you, Ambassador Fatima Chari Mohammed, Permanent Observer of the African Union to the United Nations. Wise words. And all of you, my panelists, thank you so much today. You know, at the end of the day, I keep saying, and I've said this before in many sessions, I say, if you build it, they will come. If you build it, they will come. And you guys, that's what you're doing. You're building the platform and they will come. That middle class will grow. We'll get to 1.1 billion. And I'm telling you, we'll take over the continent. Thank you so much, my panelists. Dr. Sakai Nzenza, Minister of Industry and Commerce in Zimbabwe. Thank you, Francois Kanimba, Commissioner for Common Market, Economic Commerce and Financial Affairs, the Economic Community of Central African States, ECAS. Dr. Amami Asfour, President of the Africa Business Council. Ms. Oluranti Doherty, Director of Export Development at the African Export-Import Bank, Afreximbank. And of course, our hosts, Ms. Cristina Duarte, United Nations Under-Secretary General and Special Advisor on Africa, Dr. Kai Betke of the UNIDO, United Nations Industrial Development Organization, and Mr. Muhammad Ali, Director of Trade, Goods in Competition, African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA Secretariat. Thank you all. Thank you for all of you who sent in your comments, your questions. We appreciate it. And let's keep these discussions going. This is very important. The only way to move this continent forward is by keep talking and action as well. Let's walk the walk and talk the talk. Thank you all. God bless you all. Goodbye.